Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I am thrilled. We have Victoria Schwab here with her new young adult novel. It's called This Savage Song. It's the first of a duology. It's one of those books you will read in one sitting. Well, Victoria, welcome to Anderson's in Naperville.
Thank you.
It's so great to have you here for the first time. We've been wondering when you're going to come and see this.
I'm so excited. This is great.
And this book especially, oh my gosh, this is a new take on some stuff. It was so cool to read. I just want to tell you. So I want to know, it's just out. Yesterday was the launch.
Yesterday.
So July 5th, and here you are.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you hearing from those who've got a sneak peek and had a chance to read an advanced reader's copy? And those readers are your fans of your other series.
Yeah,
right?
It's been really exciting watching. Obviously, I have a YA fandom and I have an adult fandom,
Right.
and this, I think, is the book at which they should cross. This is, I think, the perfect intersection to the point where it's being marketed in the States as YA and in the UK as adult.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how that's done? Because this
Yeah.
book, This Savage Song, it's so interesting how sometimes in the UK or even Australia and New Zealand, something will be marketed as an adult book,
Yeah.
but then it's a YA here.
Well, what I think is fascinating about it, and the thing I'm hearing from a lot of readers that are getting their hands on it earlier, who have already read it in a day, is that they actually really appreciate the lack of romance. It's an aromantic book. In a lot of ways,
Yeah.
It has the two main characters. It's a boy and a girl, and I think there's this expectation that if you have a YA novel with a boy and a girl, it's a romance.
Yeah.
And they have an adversarial relationship for the majority of the book. Then
Yeah.
they have a grudging kind of accomplice-ship for the rest of it.
Right.
But what I think kind of puts it in that middle space is that it's a dual perspective, right? You have August Flynn, this teenage monster boy, and you have Kate Harker, this teenage human girl. And I think if it were just August's story, it would be solidly YA. And if it were just Kate's story, I think you could argue for it to be adult.
Adult, yeah.
And so I think the fact that you've got both of them, that you have this coming of age narrative and finding himself, and then you have Kate, who's more trying to find her place in a very, very complicated
Right.
world. And it's because of this balance between the two of them that it kind of ends up in between.
Yeah, yeah.
I like
and
it,
you know what? This book, there were so many the yings and the yangs, the black and the white, the good
Yeah.
and the evil. You could do a different opposites,
Oh, absolutely.
and yet how some of them will be turned. And it's
I'm
so
really-
interesting, and it was
yeah.
so great that you made the girl, not the good one. Thank you. I
Yes.
loved her being a bad girl.
I
so
love it.
that's great with that yin and the yang. So there was so much of that. And I made it was like making a list. And there's no point in me reading the list of it, but
Yeah.
it was great, all those different opposites like
Thanks.
that.
I'm fascinated by tropes, and so I'm fascinated
Yeah.
by inverting them.
Right.
I think that there's a very careful balance between archetype and trope.
Yeah.
And it's in the execution. And so I definitely lean toward archetypes in stories, but I don't lean toward tropes. And so anytime I can invert a good trope,
Yeah.
I'm game to do it. And I will almost always make the boy character the more emotive of the two.
Yeah.
And I will always, I will say that the boys are usually Hufflepuff and the girls are usually Slytherin,
Slytherin?
and I feel pretty good about that.
I know, I like that very
Yeah.
much. And instead of so much other of young adult fiction out there is the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think some of us are very tired of that sort of thing.
I would
So
agree.
yeah.
I would agree.
So what a story. So I want to know, where did this start to grow, this idea for this story? Because the world you have created is pretty, it's scary, it's interesting, it's just, it's a world like I haven't seen in a lot of.
It's a very dark setting. It's set in Verity where violence starts breeding actual monsters. And I kind of hoped that by the time the book would come out, the speech I would be giving on that would be a little different. But essentially, it started a couple of years ago when I was looking at Newtown, I was looking at Aurora, I was looking at Ferguson, I was looking at this wave of violence spreading through our country and thinking there has to be an aftermath. There
Right.
has to be some kind of repercussion. And so because I write supernatural fiction, because I'm always looking for the stranger explanation, my mind went to what if all of that anger and all of that violence and all of that hatred coalesced. And so the idea is that there is an aftermath to these events, to these actions that we put into our world. And that aftermath is its own highly destructive force, these monsters, who then go on to hurt more people and to
Right.
create more chaos. And it becomes this cyclical relationship with violence that I think is unfortunately very familiar to us
Yeah.
as a country right now.
Yeah, exactly. So the two are protagonists or antagonists,
Yeah.
whatever we want to call them,
Antagonists.
right? We can call them Kate Harker and August Flynn. And August was so interesting because he is a monster, but yet he is going against his nature and going towards nurture.
Yeah.
It was so interesting, the verses here. But so where does their DNA come? Because I thought both of them were just such great characters.
You know, I used to think that authors connected with one character in their book and that was their avatar.
Right.
And the longer I write and the more that I read of my friends' works too, I'm starting to think that every character is a facet of the author in the story. Right. So I think that I took basically my anxiety and my otherness and my fear of not belonging, and I split it into two completely different forms.
Yeah.
You have Kate, who turns it into a very aggressive form of resistance almost to everything that she's feeling. And you have August, who's so trapped inside his own head that he can't get out, you know? And I'm familiar with both of those kinds of anxiety personally. And so I think I was just trying to explore not only the manifestations between inside and outside and otherness and belonging, but for the two of them, the manifestations for what do you do when you feel like you don't belong? Do you try to change the world or do you try to change yourself?
Right, right. And Kate's father, Callum, you know, he's quite an interesting guy.
He's awful.
He's awful. I mean, beyond awful. I mean,
he should not have had a child.
I mean, calling him a crime boss is like calling him a lamb or something.
Yeah,
you know?
He should not have had a child.
He should not have had a child. But so interesting what she's coming from. But then, and we don't want to give away spoilers here. It's really hard not to give away spoilers. But seeing what they have to do to save home.
Yeah.
I mean, the alliance that they have to make. And I will say, and we said before you started about, you know, or you said just a minute ago about not bringing too much romance into this.
Yeah.
Which I thought was so great because it took away, it just made this world so much realer and what's happening to these two people.
I think there's a risk in YA sometimes. It's a genre that I love. I love writing in it, but there's this syndrome that happens where, you know, the world can be ending, your friends and family can all be dying, everything can be falling apart, and yet there's this sense to like, time out, like, let's kiss.
Yeah.
And I feel like, if anything, like, romance should be the reward after the battle. It should be the thing you get to have when you can finally exhale because the rest of the world's not weighing on your shoulders. I think interrupting the intensity and the action to force in romance would have ruined the pacing. It would have ruined all of the stakes.
Right.
Because even if they were on equal footing, even if they liked each other, even if they knew each other, even if August had been alive for more than 4 years and had grown up as a normal teen, they are in opposite sides of a war, and they're both trying to do whatever's necessary to get to their own ends, you know? And I felt like it would have been extremely disingenuous to interrupt that.
Yeah.
And I feel like the hierarchy would have been messed up.
Right, right. And I think, you know, in your books, and this one especially, the thrills and the turns and the twists, I mean, it's never ending. I mean, it's like, this is you got to read it from front to back in one sitting, you know, maximum 2, you know. But it's one of those books you read late into the night. And I think if that element had been added, it would have kept a little bit of that.
Yeah, I like ticking clocks. I like, you know, things that you feel that intensity is there and that urgency is there. And so I wouldn't want to sacrifice that.
And I think this Savage Song it fits into so many genres, you know. And I don't know where they're putting this,
I don't know.
where HarperCollins wants to put this. But, you know, it's horror dystopian, it's post-apocalyptic, you know, it's urban, it's urban fantasy. It's a lot.
It is what it is, though. You know what I mean? I think it's my 11th book. Do I think I would have had more resistance if it was my debut novel? Absolutely, because I think there's this need to categorize everything. And I feel really lucky that I've gotten to this point where my readers trust me, where I can say, here is a new story, and they say, okay. You know, and my adult readers trust me, and my YA readers trust me, and it's really cool to see that trust, and to see that they're like, okay, I didn't even look at the back cover copy. I don't even know what it's about, but I'll buy it because I trust you.
So you're crossover readers. You're having them both ways.
Which I love. I love. And I think there's a reaction also of, we don't need to categorize everything. A good story is a good story.
That's right.
You know?
And that's what one of my questions was for you, because you've written, young adult, adult, middle grade. But you probably, my guess is, you don't sit down intentionally to write for a particular reader.
Definitely
It's
not.
just all about the story.
Yeah, I know pretty early on who the reader's going to be, but when I make a story, I start world first. So I usually write about outsiders. In order to write about outsiders, I have to understand insiders. In order to understand insiders, I have to understand the world that they're inside. And so because I start with setting and unspool from there, I kind of have time to sink into the environment before I feel out whose story it's going to be. So I have a little bit of time to see, is this going to be middle grade? Is this going to be YA, or is it going to be adult? And so I'm aware of it, but I don't confine myself to it. I don't sit down and be like, I need to write a new YA novel. Let's go.
Yeah,
You know?
right, exactly. So talking about world building that you do, tell us a little bit about the city in this book and this home where Kate and August live, and this place that they want to save. But tell us a little about this world, because I think it was just genius the way you created these three different types of monsters.
Yeah. So
and how they're categorized. I thought that was really cool.
Oh, thank you. That was one of the first things I did, was break down the kinds of monsters in this world. And there's, on the back cover, there's a rhyme, a children's rhyme that breaks down the monsters. I can't believe it ended up on the back cover, because it's just sung by this tiny little child in the street in one scene, but it does break them down. Essentially, Kate and August live in a place called V City. It's the capital of Verity, which is this territory in which the book is set, that has been quarantined several years before because of a phenomenon that happened. Essentially, that corruption and violence reached a point where it spilled over, started breeding actual monsters, and the surrounding territories were like, no go. And so everyone is essentially entombed inside this territory. And in this territory, you have three different kinds of monsters. You have the Corsai, who are born of non-lethal acts of violence, and they essentially have a hive mind. They're like darkness with teeth, I say, and they will eat anything, flesh and bone, living or dead, it doesn't matter. They are just like the street cleanup crew, and they're terrifying. They're the true stuff of like classic horror. You don't really see them. They just move in the shadows. And then you have the product of murders, and these are the Malkai. And these are my kind of, if I have a demon, a vampire, and an angel, which is kind of how I broke it down. The demons are the Corsai, the vampires are the Malkai. They're in that they're vampiric. They drink blood. They're stronger at night. They're highly individual, and they're a little scarier because they tend to be modeled physically on the people who created them. So the murderers. They are the murderer's literal shadow. And one of them is a very, very prominent character in the book, Sloane, who is the murder shadow, the Malkai of Callum Harker, of Kate's father. And so this weird double echo of her own father, who is just very creepy.
Yes, right.
And then the rarest monster that you have are these Sunai, and they are soul eaters. They are the products of mass tragedies in the world. And August is the youngest of the three, and he's a product of a middle school shooting. He's a product of essentially a kid being so afraid of his world and so unsure of how to handle it that he takes a gun to school. And August wakes up as a 12-year-old boy in the middle of a cafeteria that has body bags lined up on the floor. And so very dark origin stories for the creatures in this book. But unlike the Corsai who eat anything and the Malkai who eat anyone, the Sunai can only consume the souls of those who have made monsters. And because of that, some Sunai think of themselves as a cosmic cleanup crew. You know, everyone else treats a symptom, and they have the ability to treat this actual disease, to treat the sinners. But August wants so badly to be human that even though it's his purpose, it makes him feel utterly monstrous to partake in it. And so when we first meet August, he is essentially trying to starve himself out of his own state, out of monstrosity.
It's
Poor
such
August.
I know. It's
I feel so bad for August.
What a cool premise for his character. So, you know, I know you didn't put the romance in it, but can you tell us a little bit, now without spoilers, a little bit, what will happen in the second book? Because this is a duology and not a trilogy. So,
One of the things I love about duologies is you can essentially think of them as diptychs. They're halves of a whole, right? And in many ways, Savage Song is the prequel narrative to the sequel. I almost said the title, and then I realized I can't say the title.
No, don't.
But in that, the Savage Song is an origin story for a monster and a monster hunter. And then in the sequel, we see Kate and August in these respective forms that the situation, the actions of book one have groomed them into. I'm really, really big fan as a writer of consequence. I think that one of my first YA series was called The Archived. And I was inspired by the fact that there was no consequence, that you had these YA heroes and heroines who would go and the world would almost fall down and they would get beat up and horrible things would happen and they would lose their loved ones, and then in the next book they'd be totally fine. And I missed the Buffy syndrome, this idea that when Buffy dies and then Buffy comes back, Buffy is not fine.
Yeah.
And I love the notion of consequence. And so in my books, especially in Savage Song, we're going to see in book 2 a very real notion of what these characters have done and what they've chosen to give up.
Right.
And who that makes them, and them having to live with those choices.
Yeah. So, this is your 11th book, you said. And
no wonder I'm tired.
yeah, well, no. And we talked about before we started the interview that you have just finished a master's degree at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland.
Yeah, I did.
So I want to know, your first book was published, what, 5 years ago?
5 years.
How have you written 11 books and get a master's in?
In medieval depictions of monstrosity.
How do you do that in an intensified master's course over 1 year at a UK university? How do you do that and then write 11 books?
I don't know. I have no idea. 2016 me has no idea how 2014-15 me ever did that.
Yeah.
I will say that I'm a very slow writer, and nobody believes me when I say that, but I'm a very consistent writer. I believe in putting the butt in the chair and doing work all year. And so down to the fact I have a calendar system. I chart my daily progress in all aspects of life. And I think I would lose track of things very easily if I didn't. But I'm fairly disciplined. I have had this job since I graduated college. I signed with my agent when I was 19. I sold my first book at 21. This is what I do. And I take it really, really seriously. And I like my job so much that every time I sell a new book, my first thought isn't like, yay, me. It's, I get to keep doing what I love for a little bit longer.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Does it get any easier with each book?
No.
Okay, so it doesn't get any easier, but you just answered the question. It still is exciting.
I love it. I love it. It's an addiction, right? I figured out I didn't even try to write a book until I got to college. I played in poetry all through high school. And then I realized I was scared of trying to write a book because I was scared of failing. And the moment I realized I was scared, I sat down and I knew I had to do it because I have an adversarial relationship with fear. And so I did it, and it has been an addictive process ever since. It's awful. I think
it's wonderful.
Apparently, like people, I don't have children, but people who have children compare it to pregnancy in that once I've done with a book, I retcon it in my mind so that it was a wonderful process. But during the actual writing, it's awful. Yes, the amnesia sets in, and I do it all over again. But I love it. I love the problem solving. I call it playing the tiny god. I like being the tiny god of these worlds.
Yeah. So tell us a little about your master's degree and how will that degree and what you learned and studied and researched, obviously, will fit into your writing in the future, do you think?
I hope it fits in some way. I missed academia. I'm a student at heart. I think most writers are students at heart. And I, every fall, would not apply to graduate school, and then every spring would be sad that I didn't. And so a couple years ago, I decided I'm just going to apply to Edinburgh. I love that city. It's one of my favorite places in the world. And I got in and entered a one-year intensive in which I studied depictions of monstrosity in the Mappa Mundi, which are these medieval maps. But something that I discovered, and I kind of had already discovered this in writing, and it has since played out in Savage Song, is that all of the depictions of monsters that we have are not a reflection of monsters. They're a reflection of the humans at that time. The maps are made by the church. They're a reflection of what the people considered to be monstrous. And so when you study monsters, you're studying people. You know, you're studying what their fears are, what their hopes are, what they aspire to be. And so writing Savage Song, it is not a book about monsters, it is a book about people. The humans in the Savage Song are so much more monstrous than the monsters are. You know, there are no monsters without people. And so I think that's a theme that I picked up when I was studying it that really stuck to me as I was writing Savage Song.
And also too, you know, when you think of the medieval time period, the fear of the unknown and how they explain that.
Absolutely.
Was so interesting.
I mean, absolute fear of outsider insider. You know, that theme that I think I explore in every single one of my books. And it was the core concept for medieval art was what belongs and what doesn't.
So series writing. So I know this is the duology, and all your other books have been series.
Well, I have one standalone.
One standalone, that's right. So do you enjoy writing series? And I think you've found sort of the secret to writing them compared to some others where we feel like that middle book is skip it and just go
Yeah.
to the final book, that sort of thing?
I think you have to treat every book in a series as an entity unto itself. I have zero patience for series that take me 2/3 of the way through a plot and then stop at a cliffhanger and say, oh, but this is a series, I'm allowed to do that. A good series takes you all the way through a plot point and begins the next one.
Right.
So that you have that tiny little hint, that tiny little carryover. So regardless of the length of my series, I try to write. I like writing series because I get to sink into the world. I get to do more world building. But my rule to myself when I'm writing series is that every single book should have a contained narrative arc.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think we talked about setting out for writing for an age group or not. But when you sit down, where do you sit? And that question of outlining, because I think I know the answer you're going to give me. But I get so many different answers when I talk to different authors, and there's an answer that I like better, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, so I want to hear what you do, especially when you're talking about a trilogy and a story arc, or even a duology. Do you know how it starts and finishes and not what happens in between?
So I will say that the very first thing I know for any story, whether it's a 5-book series or a single book, is the end. And the reason I do that is because in order to know who my characters should be on page 1, I need to know who they are on the last page, and then I work backwards. I essentially take them to where they're going to end up and then slowly rewind them so that I can see who they need to start as. But there's, plotting and pantsing, it's called, flying by the seat of your pants or outlining heavily. I'm a connect the dotser. I need to have 5 to 10 plot points that make up my story. My story could not be my story without these 5 to 10 plot points. Sometimes they're plot, sometimes they're character, actually. Sometimes they're just a fun scene I want to write.
Right.
And then I don't plan until I sit down to work on them. I don't plan the way between them. I have to have just enough freedom that it feels like I'm walking through the woods discovering. But I can't not have a path, or else I'll wander 50,000 words in the wrong direction. That is not good for any deadline.
But those discoveries are great for us as readers too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you have to have them. And I think that readers can tell when something is scripted.
Yeah.
Readers can tell when something has been outlined to the point where the author is not making any discoveries as they go. And I want to make sure that my readers have those natural moments of inhale and those things that I felt when I discovered a little plot point that needed to be there.
Right, right. So I read that your mom is British and your dad is
Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
So where did you grow up, and how did having parents from American back and so how did that influence you as a writer and the stories that you heard growing up and that sort of thing?
Well, so my mom is English and my dad's from Beverly Hills 90210. They're very star-crossed, they are very strange that they ever met. I grew up mostly in the South, which is its own strangeness when you take a half Brit, half Californian girl and you put her in the South. But I grew up surrounded by most of the women from my mother's household. And so I grew up with a very strong English accent until I was almost 8. I spoke like a tiny little British child because my aunt is English, my grandparents were Scottish, and so on and so forth. Everyone is either English or Scottish. And so because my mom is very close with her family and my dad's very disconnected from his, I grew up with this heavily European leaning. And since then, my parents have now retired to a 500-year-old cottage in the French countryside. So they rub it in every day. But I've always had a European leaning, and then now that my family actually lives in Europe, I still go that way. But it was definitely... It was a household in which the English accent and the English voice was a soothing thing.
Right.
And it's something that I think I try to put in my writing a little bit, especially things like Shades of Magic. I want it to feel like an English author wrote it, because I think sometimes you can tell the difference, and there's a certain cadence to the prose if the writer is very aware of that sort of thing. You look at something like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or Neil Gaiman's a perfect example
Neil Gaiman's
of that.
a great example.
Even if you're not listening to a Neil Gaiman audiobook narrated by himself, you can tell it's an English author. It has a very specific cadence.
The cadence and a rhythm to it.
And I love that. I grew up with, whether it was hearing my mother read me stories or reading English authors, I grew up with that cadence in my head, and I want it around me constantly.
Yeah. So you mentioned before we sat down that you met Neil Gaiman in Edinburgh and had a drink. So tell us about that experience, because that's pretty cool.
I did. Well, I'm such a dork. I wear a bracelet on my wrist that says, "What would Neil Gaiman do?" WWNGD. And I've worn it since probably 2010 because he's always been a writing hero of mine. I think not just because I love his books, but I think that I think he's a wonderful, genuine person. And I aspired to be like him when I realized I was going to be an author.
Yeah.
He's just been a role model from the very beginning. And I was lucky enough to stand in line for 3 hours at my very first con and meet him.
Yeah.
And ever since then, about once a year, our paths cross in some way. And it progressed from me standing on one side of the table being like, Neil Gaiman, I'm such a big fan, to me going backstage at the next event, Neil Gaiman, I'm such a big fan, and him giving me a hug. And now, you know, I consider him such a mentor. I consider him such a wonderful, kind and genuine person. And so when I had the opportunity to essentially go into these Scottish catacombs under Edinburgh and have gin cocktails, I certainly wasn't going to turn it down.
I would say no. That's very,
you know,
that is so cool.
Very like something that Neil Gaiman would do. And I picked the place too. I was like, I have designed something that Neil Gaiman would actually write in a book.
Oh, that is so great. That is so great. I love the cover art. So tell us a little about that. Or did you choose that? I love the cover art.
I wish. You know, 9 times out of 10 authors have no control whatsoever in the covers. I will say that I feel very, very blessed by it. I did want one thing in particular, which is I said, don't put a face on it. Don't put any faces on the cover.
Thank you.
Because one, I think it's limiting in so many ways, and all of a sudden only certain people can see themselves in it, and that's not fair.
Right.
But also, usually faces on covers tend to skew books towards girls.
Right.
And this is a very, very much a boy book as much as a girl book. Boy book, girl book, I hate those terms. But it's a book that should appeal across the gender divide. I love that I'm getting as many messages from young male readers as I am from young female readers, that both see themselves in it. But I just wanted something that could appeal to my adult fan base and my YA fan base, and appeal to both genders. And I feel like Harper nailed it. It makes me so happy, and it's so ominous.
And that's what we need, is more young adult that appeals to both guys and girls. So it's so great.
It shouldn't be about like, we need more boy books and we need more girl books. We need more books that can appeal equally. Yeah.
So tell us what you're working on now, because obviously the next book is this, but you have another book coming out this fall, so that must be done. And
oh, thank God. My next book does not come out until February. The Conjuring of Light, which is the series, book 3 in the Shades of Magic series. I want to call it the temporary conclusion, the stopping point, the end of this arc. They're what I consider the Black Magic arc, and the Shades of Magic series concludes with Conjuring of Light in February. I'm so excited. I just finished it. And then, I'm hard at work on the next book, the finale in Savage Song series, in the Monsters of Verity series. And then after that, the next big thing I'm working on, which I'm over the moon excited about, is called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Ooh, and I like the title.
It is a love story between a French girl and the devil over 300 years. And he blesses her to live forever and then curses her to be forgotten by everyone she meets.
Interesting.
And so I'm so excited. I've been working on it for 6 years. And my publisher,
now, is this adult or young adult?
It's adult. And Tor finally convinced me to give it to them.
Oh, hey.
So
well, lucky Tor.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so Victoria, I do these interviews. There's a quick. This is a lightning round quiz.
All right.
So all the answers are this is all book related.
Okay.
So whatever comes to mind right off the bat. Okay, favorite book when you were a child?
Oh, probably The Princess Bride.
Okay. How about something in high school or college that has stayed with you?
Harry Potter. I grew up exactly with Harry Potter. I was 11 when Harry Potter came out.
Okay, and if you were to have a dinner with 3 authors, alive or dead, and you, who would those 3 be?
I would probably say Neil Gaiman, because I can now form a sentence around him without getting all blushy blush. I would also say Holly Black. I just am a huge, huge fan of Holly Black's work. And I would say Leigh Bardugo, who's actually a friend of mine, and she's just brilliant. I love being her. So I feel like Neil Gaiman, Holly Black, and Leigh Bardugo, we would just have a good time.
Fantastic dinner. Okay, and what are you reading now? Or read recently that you loved?
I am currently binge reading Dan Wells' John Cleaver series.
Oh, okay.
He has a series called I Am Not a Serial Killer, and I think there are 5 out right now, and I'm just devouring them.
Okay. All right, A+, good score. Victoria, thank you so much. Congratulations on this Savage Song, and come back and see us.
Thank you.
For your next book.
I will.
Great conversation with author Victoria Schwab about her new young adult novel. It's called This Savage Song. It's a first in a duology. This one you'll read in one sitting. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.